Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling a really pervasive issue, payment fraud. Think about it. Anytime money changes hands, there's a potential risk. And the ways fraudsters try to exploit those moments are remarkably diverse.
That's right. It's a huge field. And to get a handle on this, we've been looking at a really good resource. Payment fraud, FinCrime intelligence.
Yeah, and our goal with this deep dive is really to understand the core of payment fraud, as laid out by FinCrime intelligence. We want to cut through the noise, maybe give you some clear, actionable insights.
Definitely.
Because this isn't some static thread, is it? It's constantly shifting.
Constantly.
And the impact, well, whether you're an individual or a big organization, it can be truly significant. Okay, so let's start at the beginning. When we talk about payment fraud, what exactly are we looking at?
Well, in essence, payment fraud is about deceptive or unauthorized actions. The aim is always stealing funds at some point during a payment process.
Okay, deceptive or unauthorized.
Right. And what's crucial to grasp, as the source points out, is that this isn't just one thing. It covers familiar stuff like, credit card fraud, check fraud.
The classics.
Kind of, yeah. But also the increasingly common online payment scams. The fundamental move, though, it's usually the same, either using stolen payment info like card details or actually manipulating the transaction itself.
So it's way beyond just someone physically getting hold of your card.
Oh, absolutely. The playing field is much, much larger now.
Right. And FinCrime intelligence breaks down some of the most common methods. Let's start with one they call authorized push payment fraud, or APP fraud. Now, that sounds a bit odd, doesn't it? Authorized.
It does. And what's particularly insidious about APP fraud, and a key insight here, is how it really exploits trust and authority sometimes.
How so?
Well, with APP fraud, the victim themselves actually initiates the payment, but they're doing it under false pretenses. Fraudsters, they spend a lot of time crafting believable stories. They often leverage publicly available info to seem legit. Think about those scams. Someone pretends to be from your bank, or maybe a government agency.
Urgently needing money.
Exactly. Urgently requesting payment. It just highlights the need for constant vigilance, even when you think you're making a totally legitimate transaction.
That's really unsettling. Okay, next up, card not present fraud, or CNP. This one probably rings a bell for a lot of us, especially with online shopping.
Exactly. Yeah, CNP refers to unauthorized transactions where the physical card isn't actually used. So mainly online or sometimes over the phone. It relies heavily on stolen credit or debit card details.
And with e-commerce booming.
Precisely. The explosion of e-commerce has unfortunately just created more opportunities for this kind of fraud.
Okay. Then there's business email compromise, or BEC. This sounds like something businesses really need to be hyper-aware of.
Absolutely. BEC is laser-focused on organizations. Fraudsters will impersonate high-level executives or maybe even known vendors.
People you normally trust?
Right, to trick employees into making fraudulent wire transfers. And these scams, they can be remarkably sophisticated, often involving detailed knowledge of the company's internal processes, key people.
Wow.
It's a stark reminder that cybersecurity isn't just about the tech defenses. It's also about understanding those, human vulnerabilities within a company.
Makes sense. Moving on, we have account takeover, or ATO. This sounds like a direct invasion almost of your personal financial life.
It really is. In ATO, criminals get control of a legitimate user's payment account.
And once they're in?
Well, once they're in, they can initiate all sorts of unauthorized transactions, draining funds, making dodgy purchases.
How do they get in, usually?
Often through stolen login credentials, maybe from phishing scams or data breaches we hear so much about. What's particularly concerning is just how fast fraudsters can move once they gain access. Victims often have very little time to react.
Scary stuff. And it doesn't stop there. FinCrime intelligence also mentions payroll and vendor fraud. This seems like a really kind of under-the-radar way for fraud to happen. It hits the core of how businesses operate.
Yes, exactly. This involves manipulating banking details. Or maybe diverting invoice payments meant for legitimate vendors. It often exploits weaknesses in, say, internal controls, or maybe uses compromised employee accounts. What makes this so damaging is the potential for pretty significant financial loss over time, often before it's even detected.
Right. It could be happening for months.
Potentially.
Okay, finally, they mention interception and redirection. That sounds almost like spy movie stuff.
It does have a bit of a dramatic feel to it. This involves intercepting payment instructions while they're being processed.
In transit.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
And then altering crucial details like changing the IBAN number or the account name of who it's supposed to go to. It just highlights the vulnerabilities that can exist even in payment paths we think are secure.
It's clear from this list, as the source emphasizes, that fraudsters are constantly innovating. They don't stand still.
Not at all.
So how can we even begin to spot these, increasingly sophisticated attacks? What are some red flags we should look out for?
FinCrime Intelligence gives a really practical list of key indicators here. One of the first things to pay close attention to is any unusual spikes or changes. Transaction sizes or how often transactions happen.
Like a pattern breaking.
Exactly. If an account that typically does small, regular payments suddenly sends out a huge one-off transfer, that should immediately raise suspicion.
That makes perfect sense. It's about spotting deviations from the norm. What else?
Well, significant and unexpected changes to beneficiary account details or payment instructions, that's another major warning sign.
For example.
Say, a trusted vendor suddenly asks for payment to a totally different bank account with no clear, verifiable reason. That should set off alarm bells. Similarly, the use of, say, financial institutions or accounts in jurisdictions known for higher financial crime risks,
Yeah.
especially if there's no logical business reason for it.
That's definitely something to watch, especially with international transactions, I guess.
Absolutely. Also, be mindful of the timing and geographical origin of transactions. Payments happening outside normal business hours or coming from IP addresses that don't match the user's usual activity.
Hmm.
Those can be indicators of fraudulent access. And be extremely cautious, really cautious of any situation where you're pressured to make urgent payments without the normal chance for verification. Fraudsters love creating that sense of panic to bypass security checks.
That feeling of urgency.
Yeah.
So, yeah, such a common manipulation tactic.
Yeah.
What about more subtle digital clues?
Repeated failed attempts, trying to log into an account or maybe initiate transactions again and again, that can also be a sign someone unauthorized is trying to get in. All of these indicators, the source really stresses this, they need to be integrated into robust, real-time monitoring systems. And crucially, reviewed by trained professionals, people who actually understand how to interpret these signals.
Right. It's not just about having the tech.
No, it's about having the expertise to make sense of the data the tech provides.
Okay. So being able to detect these anomalies is crucial. But obviously preventing the fraud entirely, that's the ultimate goal. What preventative strategies does FinCrime Intelligence recommend?
They strongly advocate for a layered security approach, which is just a really sound strategy generally.
Layers. Makes sense. Like what?
Strong authentication is foundational. Implementing multi-factor authentication, MFA, for initiating or approving payments, that adds a critical extra step that makes it much harder for unauthorized people to complete fraudulent transactions.
MFA has become so much more common now, which is definitely a good thing.
It is, yeah. A positive step. Other essential layers. Continuous transaction monitoring, that's vital. Automated systems that can analyze payment behavior in real time, flag anomalies or suspicious patterns.
Catching it quickly.
Exactly. They can be incredibly effective in stopping fraud before it's finalized. User education is another absolutely critical layer.
Training people.
Yes, regularly training employees and customers to recognize the signs. Phishing attacks, spoofing, social engineering tactics, that can significantly reduce their vulnerability.
Because at the end of the day, the human element can often be the weakest link in that security chain, right?
Precisely. The source also emphasizes the importance of segregation of duties within organizations,
Right.
making sure different people are responsible for initiating payments versus authorizing them. It creates essential checks and balances.
Yeah.
And the increasing adoption of confirmation of pay services COP. Those allow you to verify that the name and account details actually match the intended recipient before you make a transfer. That's a valuable preventative measure.
I've noticed that appearing more and more myself. It definitely adds a layer of reassurance, doesn't it?
It really does. And for businesses, setting up robust vendor validation processes is crucial. Things like implementing procedures, maybe making callbacks, using known contact info to verify any changes to supplier payment instructions. That can prevent huge losses.
Right. Don't just trust the email.
Absolutely not. FinCrime Intelligence concludes that it's the combination of these proactive measures, guided by a thorough, risk-based approach, that creates a much more resilient defense against payment fraud.
Now, payment fraud doesn't exist in a vacuum, does it? There are definitely regulatory frameworks involved.
Oh, absolutely. Regulatory bodies worldwide take payment fraud very seriously, particularly because of its links to broader financial crimes, money laundering, terrorist financing, even sanctions evasion.
Right. It can be a gateway.
It can be. Financial institutions, especially, have several key regulatory obligations they absolutely must adhere to.
Okay, what are some of the main regulatory expectations there?
Well, they're required to actively monitor all transactions for any signs of suspicious activity. That falls under anti-money laundering, AML, and counter-terrorist financing, CFT regulations.
So constant monitoring.
Yes. And furthermore, they have a legal obligation to report any confirmed or suspected fraud cases through suspicious activity reports, or SARs.
Okay.
Compliance with consumer protection standards is also essential. Things like the Payment Services Directive 2, PSD2 in Europe, that mandates strong customer authentication and sets clear rules on liability for unauthorized payments.
So it's not just about the potential financial losses from the fraud itself. There are big legal implications if you don't have the right controls in place.
Exactly. And financial institutions need to establish and maintain robust internal controls. These need to align with relevant risk management and cybersecurity guidance.
And if they don't,
Failure to meet these requirements can lead to serious consequences. We're talking significant enforcement actions, substantial fines, and of course, potentially severe damage to their reputation and the trust of their clients.
it sounds like navigating that regulatory landscape is just as critical as actually implementing the preventative measures themselves.
They go hand in hand, really.
Okay, now let's shift gears a bit and talk about the role of technology in fighting payment fraud. How is tech innovation helping in this ongoing battle?
Technology is absolutely fundamental. Modern fraud prevention strategies rely heavily on cutting-edge tools to even try and keep pace with the fraudsters.
Who are also using tech, presumably.
Unfortunately, yes. On the defense side, machine learning models are playing an increasingly vital role. They can analyze vast amounts of transaction data, identify subtle, evolving patterns of fraud, things human analysts alone might miss.
Like a superpowered pattern recognition tool?
Just a good way to put it, yeah. Specifically trained to spot fraud.
Makes sense. You need something that can learn and adapt just as quickly as the fraudsters change their methods.
Precisely. Behavioral analytics is another incredibly powerful tool. It works by monitoring users' typical behavior, things like, their keystroke patterns, how they navigate websites, the devices they usually use.
How they normally act online.
Right. To detect any anomalies that might suggest a compromised account. Real-time alert systems are also crucial. They give immediate notifications of potentially suspicious activity, which allows for instant intervention, maybe blocking a transaction or requiring extra verification before it goes through.
So it's about catching the fraud attempt in progress before the money actually disappears.
Exactly, that's the goal. And device and IP intelligence plays a key role too. Identifying unrecognized devices, maybe unusual geographical mismatches in logins or transactions, or the use of proxy servers. These can all be strong indicators of fraud.
Lots of tech tools in the arsenal.
Definitely. And FinCrime intelligence emphasizes that as digital transactions just continue their rapid growth, seamlessly integrating these sophisticated technologies into core payment platforms.
Yeah.
Well, it's becoming not just advantageous, but absolutely essential for effective fraud prevention.
It really does sound like a continuous arms race, doesn't it?
It absolutely is.
The fraudsters come up with new ways to try and breach defenses, and the defenders have to constantly innovate and adapt just to stay ahead or even keep up.
That's a perfect analogy, and it really underscores why staying informed, continuously learning about these evolving threats like we've done today with this FinCrime intelligence report is just so critically important.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the, frankly, quite complex world of payment fraud, what would you say is the most crucial takeaway for our listeners?
I think the key takeaway is that payment fraud is, well, it's a constantly evolving threat, and unfortunately still a very prevalent form of financial crime. And because the methods and the technologies used by fraudsters are continuously adapting, you absolutely need a proactive and multi-layered approach.
Not just one silver bullet.
No, definitely not. A multi-layered approach to both detect and prevent it is essential, whether you're an individual or you're working within an organization.
Right. It's not a case of just implementing one security measure and thinking, okay, I'm protected now.
Precisely. It demands a strong, integrated combination. You need advanced analytical tools, you need comprehensive education and training for staff, for customers, and you need robust, real-time security controls, all working together to effectively safeguard payment systems and, maybe most importantly, maintain that trust with your customers and stakeholders.
So, considering these ever shifting tactics we've explored today, here's a final thought for you listening. What proactive steps can you take, whether you're managing your personal finances or perhaps you're involved in financial operations within an organization? What can you do to try and stay ahead of the curve to protect your financial interactions? It would certainly be beneficial, I think, to explore resources like FinCrime Intelligence further just to keep yourself informed. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.